Привет, друзья! И сегодня мы поговорим о России. So, one thing you may or may not know about me is that I've lived in Russia on two different occasions. The first being over summer, the second being the fall and winter of my junior year in university. Now, the other day, I was just, scrolling through my memories on Instagram as one does. I just kept seeing all these pictures of that fall that I spent in Russia and the snow and the parks and hanging out with my friends, and it was making me really nostalgic. So I thought, what better thing to do than make a video talking about some of the things I miss most from when I lived in Russia. And I feel like there are two things I should say, disclaimers as you will, before I launch into this. Obviously, there are a lot of things that I love and miss about Russian culture. You know, if I was making a list of all the things that I miss the most, I could easily have, my host mom and the friends that I made there and how warm and wonderful the Russian people are. But just sort of to keep things light and fun, today I'm going to be talking about a little bit less serious things, more everyday. I don't want to say more superficial because they are things that I genuinely miss about Russia, but they are more of everyday, sort of less serious things. And then secondly, while I lived in Russia 2 times, both times I was living in Moscow, so of course these things that I'm talking about, some of them are a little bit more Moscow specific, but I also think that a lot of them do apply more generally to Russia. All right, number 1. Now, I know I mentioned this before in another video, but the thing that I really miss about Russia is the parks. In general, Russian cities, and of course I'm speaking from the perspective of Moscow, but I have seen them, in Sochi and in St. Petersburg, and even in some smaller towns, Russian cities tend to have a lot more and also larger parks than I've noticed in US cities. And this can actually make the city seem really, really green. Even though we tend to think of Russian cities as being these, gray, blocky buildings and, depressing streets, there's actually a lot of green space. This can be in courtyards, sort of like in the intersections of boulevards, but then there are also these really large parks that tend to be a little bit out of the center of the city. In Moscow, 2 of my favorite parks were Zaritsina and Kolomyanskaya, and I'll insert some pictures here if I can find any on my computer. But both of these are just like incredibly massive parks that are, I want to say, like 15-minute walks from different metro stops, so it's incredibly accessible. And it's just a really nice place to go, enjoy the good weather when it's sunny, or even sort of look at the leaves in the fall. Another really nice thing is that I know in some park there are actually apple and cherry trees that people, I've seen Russian families out picnicking and picking apples. I don't know if it's legal, but it's definitely not enforced if it is illegal. So the parks are definitely something that I miss. And of course, some US cities do have nice parks, but I found on the whole that Russia has a much bigger park culture, tends to have more parks, and more people take advantage of them than in the US. Number 2, Russian pharmacies. Now, I feel like in the US, going to a pharmacy isn't super common. They're usually in a grocery store. If you really have to go to somewhere like a CVS or a Walgreens, it's usually for something like Band-Aids or nail polish. Russian pharmacies, on the other hand, not only are they everywhere, literally, like on every corner there is a pharmacy, but you can also buy a surprising number of things in a Russian pharmacy. Everything from, antibiotics, which you can get without a prescription, or, cough drops, skin lotion, you name it, the Russian pharmacies have probably got it. Not only are they everywhere, but a lot of them are also 24 hours, which is incredibly convenient if you're traveling. So I definitely miss the convenience of, being able to walk down the street to the pharmacy whenever I needed something and not having to schlep super far to go to a CVS. Now, number 3 is something that I think anyone who has ever spent any time in Russia or any other country surrounding it will probably agree with me, but that is, I miss Georgian food. Now, if you've never had Georgian food before, let me tell you that you're definitely missing out. Don't get me wrong, I also miss Russian food a lot. However, on the whole, Georgian food tends to incorporate a lot more spices than traditional Russian cooking. You have things like khinkali, which are these little dumplings filled with soup, or my absolute favorite, ajap sandal, which is a sort of spiced eggplant dish, or hachapuri, which is cheese bread, all of which are delicious and all of which I miss very, very much. I know that there are a few cities in the US that have Georgian restaurants. However, on the whole, they are pretty hard to find, and when you do find them, they tend to be very expensive. And as a broke grad student, I am not about to spend that much money on Georgian food, especially when I have gotten very used to relatively cheap and tasty Georgian food in Russia. I have not seen much Georgian food in the US on the whole, so if anyone is looking to open up a new restaurant chain, I would definitely go to a Georgian restaurant. Keep that in mind. Number 4, on the topic of food, one thing I've noticed a lot in Moscow, although I'm sure that it is also in some other larger Russian cities, is these sort of indoor food halls. And I've seen these starting to crop up in the US, but nowhere's near on the scale of the ones that I've seen in Russia. Essentially what they are is an old building, generally, that's been refurbished. And inside there'll be a bunch of different stalls selling food, and then a bunch of seating sort of in the open spaces. Not only do they tend to be pretty inexpensive, but they're also incredibly convenient, and they usually have like a really fun atmosphere inside. They'll have, lights and plants and sort of like a hipster vibe going on. And that's something I definitely miss. Now, I've seen these all over Moscow, but one of my favorite ones was called Depot, and it was near to the Beloruskaya metro station, and it had the most amazing Vietnamese food I have ever tasted. Honestly, I would go back to Russia just for that. All right, the 5th thing on my list, halfway there, is the convenience of being able to use Yandex for everything. Now in the US we have Google, which is fine. However, in Russia they use Yandex, which works a lot like Google, except that it sort of has a monopoly on everything. So you'll have your basic Yandex Maps, but you'll also have a Yandex app for public transportation. There's Yandex Taxi, which functions exactly like Uber does. Yandex Yeda, which is like Uber Eats, I think. I haven't actually used it, and then there's even Yandex Music, which is the music app that I still use now that I'm in the US, because I can use it for both American and Russian music, and also some Finnish music when I'm feeling fancy. However, the really nice thing about everything being sort of owned, all these apps being owned by Yandex, is that they all work with each other. So, for example, the Maps app is linked to Yandex Yeda. So that means that when you click on a restaurant on Maps, you can pull up the menu and it will link to Yandex Yeda so you can order food. The same with the public transportation. When you click on like a bus stop on Yandex Maps, it can then link you to the Yandex transportation app, which is really convenient, and I wish that we had a system like that in the US. Now, number 6 might sound a little strange since I am not personally religious, but one thing I really miss about Russia is all the Orthodox churches. Now, I know some people aren't super fond of religion or churches, and that's totally fine. However, personally, I have always loved, when I'm traveling, visiting churches. As I said, I'm not religious. However, I love to go and look at the architecture and the artwork. And then I've also just found that a lot of times they just have a really calming atmosphere inside. And more than any other place that I visited, other than say maybe Italy, Russia is full of churches. Not only is it full of churches, but I found that Orthodox churches tend to be some of the most beautifully decorated, really atmospheric spaces that I've ever been in. Right, number 7. Now, this could definitely be a Moscow specific thing. I don't know, maybe in St. Petersburg they have this too, I'm not sure. However, one thing that I noticed all over Moscow when I was there was coffee places where the price of the coffee was fixed to the dollar. So whatever the ruble exchange rate to the dollar would be, they would fix it. So you would never be paying more than $1 for a cup of coffee, which for me, coming from the land of expensive Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, was amazing because, firstly, it was pretty good coffee. And secondly, it was incredibly cheap. For me, when I was, in a hurry or out with friends and we just wanted to grab a quick coffee, it was incredibly convenient. I know the names of at least two of them was Coffix, is the one I went to the most often, and then there's another one called $1, but I think there were a few others as well. And I just thought that was such a neat idea. All right, number 8 is more of a cultural thing, but it's something that I would love to see in the US and definitely miss about Russia, and that is the flower culture. Now, one of the first things you'll notice when you go to Russia is that there are flower shops everywhere. And at first I was totally confused by this because I was like, who is buying all these flowers? Where are they going? In the US, we tend to only buy flowers for really formal occasions, maybe if you're going to a funeral or if you're meeting your partner's parents for the first time, you might bring flowers. But in Russia, it's a lot more common to give flowers as gifts. Specifically, men give women flowers a lot, but it's not exclusively that. I know that I actually bought flowers for some of my teachers, and I just think that that's a really lovely tradition that is maintained. And I wish that in the US we actually did that more often because I don't think anybody dislikes getting flowers. I know I personally would love some flowers every once in a while. Number 9 might just be the thing I miss the most about Russia, and that is the public transportation system. There are some cities in the US that have really great public transportation. However, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find another city in the world that can really match the Moscow metro system. Not only is it incredibly convenient, it covers basically the whole city, but it's also incredibly fast. Trains come around every 2 minutes depending on which station you're at. Then on top of that, the Moscow metro is really a work of art in and of itself. I used to pass through the Komsomolskaya station every day on the way to my university classes, and let me tell you, it was gorgeous. I will try to, again, put a picture here so you can see, but the whole thing is done up in mosaics, and there's gold, and this beautiful yellow plaster, and columns. I don't think any of the metro systems that we have in the US can really compare to that. And then the final thing that I miss about Russia would probably be the weather. Now, I know you're gonna say, Alexa, are you crazy? You can't seriously miss the Russian winters. But honestly, I do a little bit. Honestly, the seasons in Russia are beautiful. Not only the summers are nice in Moscow, the autumns can be really gorgeous there as well. In fact, a lot of times in Russia, all the leaves will change color. It gets really brisk out. It's great weather for walking around. And this is actually my favorite time to go visit the parks like I was talking about and just sort of see how beautiful nature is. Now, I will say in winter it does snow a lot and it gets very dark. However, I found that at least Moscow and St. Petersburg, which I've also been to in the winter, look incredibly beautiful in the snow, and it is well worth the cold to walk down the streets and see all the trees covered in that first dusting and walk along the crunchy paths. Right now I'm currently living in Seattle, which, as much as I love it, it basically is rainy and gray most of the year. So I would definitely say that the seasonal variation in Russia, with its warm summers, crisp autumns, and cold but beautiful winters, is something that I miss. Ну хорошо. That's all I have for today. Thank you for taking a little stroll with me down memory lane. Just talking about all of these things makes me miss Moscow and miss Russia so much. I'm hoping that I'll be able to return there sometime. However, coronavirus is sort of putting a crimp in all of my current plans. However, never say never. I hope that I will return. Until then, I will be studying Russia from a distance here in the US. If you enjoyed this video, ну хорошо. That's all I have for today. Thank you for taking a little stroll with me down memory lane. Just talking about all of these things makes me miss Moscow and miss Russia so much. I'm hoping that I'll be able to return there sometime. However, coronavirus is sort of putting a crimp in all of my current plans. However, never say never. I hope that I will return. Until then, I will be studying Russia from a distance here in the US. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to see more, go ahead and subscribe. Alright, see you next time. Пока пока.